Who will be the next Kyren Williams? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. Follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. Check out her work at Behind the Steel Curtain, Yahoo, and Pro Football Focus. And of course, it's a Wednesday, so that means that Matt Williamson joining the show. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. We've got a big show lined up for you guys today. We are answering your Twitter questions, and we're going to start with this really good one from Tyler. He wants to know, who is the next Kyren Williams, a running back that didn't do maybe much as a rookie or a young player that turns into a dynasty superstar? Matt, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Okay, so I think there's three low-hanging fruit candidates, and then there's one you have to squint a little. So I apologize if I'm stealing your guys, running backs, but they're all young. They've all been a little bit buried. They've flashed. Kendre Miller's the one you got to squint a little bit. I think Kamara's not long for this world. Jamal Williams doesn't worry me. Could they draft another running back? Probably not. They have so many other needs. And then the three that just jump off the page to me are Spears in Tennessee, Brown with the Bengals, because I don't know if Mixon will be back, and Zamir White with the Raiders.
I love those picks. And right out of the gate, so my guy coming out of this conversation here was Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Matt, we're right on target here. And obviously we didn't get to see a ton of Chase Brown. Was injured for a portion of the year, missed some games, but obviously he's playing behind Joe Mixon, who is paid a large, handsome sum of money. They kind of got hot towards the end of the year. They were almost in playoff contention. So I think they were, trying to get the ball to these established veterans, especially given the quarterback situation. But Chase Brown, man, I thought watching him just looked so explosive. So had a lot of burst, had a lot of usage in the receiving game, which you also love to see. And that obviously translates from some of the way that they want to utilize Joe Mixon. They can save some money moving on from Joe Mixon this year. And obviously there's the change in offensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator just got hired as the head coach of the Titans. So we're going to see a little bit of a new regime here for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'm wondering how much that might favor Chase Brown, who, I think as a rookie this year, I think pleasantly surprised, especially in a backup role.
Yeah, I want to talk about Chase Brown, but I want to kind of ask Matt a question. But when I was watching the Bengals this year, especially early in the year, I just kept thinking, man, this offense looks so freaking slow, right? You've got Tyler Boyd out of the slot, who was never fast. T. Higgins is not a burner. And then Jamar Chase was banged up. And Joe Mixon, even coming out of Oklahoma, was like a 4.55 guy. So when you saw Chase Brown playing, it's just like, this is what this offense has needed forever. They need this infusion of speed. My only concern with Brown is, do you think that the Bengals will lean into him being like a workhorse guy, or do you think they're going to kind of stick him in a Jalen Warren type of role where, hey, we really like you, but we don't like you enough to give you 22 touches every single week?
Who's to say? But a couple things I want to touch on is, you mentioned the speed of the Bengals offense, especially with a slowed Chase, Higgins, Burrow, the best guys. But they don't have a tight end that stretches the field either. Nope. I mean, they were slow, plodding type of team. Now, one thing that Ryan and I used to talk about a lot late in the season is a lot of these running backs that haven't done hardly anything all year will burst on the scene around Thanksgiving or December. And they look faster than everybody else because they haven't been touched all year. They have no wear and tear on their body. They're chomping at the bit to get out there. So maybe Spears, Zamir White, Chase Brown fit that mold. But when you do that, you earn touches. And I know it's been a while, but Kate mentioned that the coaching change in Cincinnati, losing the coordinator. Well, the coaching staff there came from the McVay system. I'm not saying Kyren Williams and Chase Brown are a 1-for-1 match, but deep down, do they want to pay an older guy like Mixon, or are they very comfortable just saying, Brown looks good enough for me, take it over just like Williams did. We'll spend our money to try to keep Higgins or replace the right tackle or find a third guy if Boyd moves on. They have a lot of needs. I don't know that they can afford to spend much on other running backs. And I think Mixon will be gone.
Looking at just, Chase Brown as a prospect, right? So obviously it is kind of hard to weed out some of these guys that are either just like, are they fresh or are they really good athletes? And I do think Chase Brown, he is one of those really good athletes that I think can sustain a little bit more of that volume. Ran a 4.43 40-yard dash. 40-inch vertical jump, that's 94th percentile, 92nd percentile broad jump. He's explosive. He's got big hands too, which I love for running backs in the receiving game. I think he fits the mold for me of a guy that could stand that test of time. And I don't know. I'm all in on Chase Brown, but Tajay Spears, another one that we just talked about on the show, I think just last week, as a potential value, despite the fact that his ADP in Dynasty continues to climb, especially with the departure of Derrick Henry and questions about his long-term viability for health. He looked good. He passed the eyeball test. He passed the analytics test. Like, there weren't many tests he didn't pass this year. And of course, last but not least, I love me some Kendrick Miller. I was so disappointed this year to see that he just never really carved himself out of roles. Started out the year, banged up, which I think doesn't help you earn a role, right? If you're injured, especially in like training camp, it gets really hard to carve out a projected role in your respective offense early on, and never came to fruition. But Kendrick Miller, one of these guys coming out of TCU that, I mean, he could do a little bit of everything. He was a touchdown machine. Like, he has RB1 workhorse potential, and he's one of these few running backs like Chase Brown. I don't know that he's like workhorse material. Kendrick Miller is workhorse material for me.
And I'll just mention Zamir White because that was another guy that Matt mentioned really quickly. 457 yards in his 4 starts. The only reason that I'm a little bit hesitant to call him the next Kyren is just because that Raiders offense might be really bad. Again, Matt and I were just talking about pre-show, like who the offensive coordinator and stuff is going to be. I think one of the reasons why
quarterback.
Well, that's another thing. Who's the quarterback going to be? But Kyren went into a team that was one of the best offenses in the league, and that led to a lot of red zone opportunities. I really like Zamir White. I don't really like this offense that he's playing. Any final thoughts, Matt, here before we move on?
A name I didn't mention on purpose that I used to have a crush on, but Tank Bigsby's rookie year was just too bad. I mean, it was just too bad. So if you could get him as like a throw-in on a deal, maybe he gets in there. And I guess my last nugget too, and this might apply to Miller. Sometimes it's hard to find these things out. But when guys don't get a chance to play at this position, 9 out of 10 times they're either a fumbler, but more often than not, they have pass protection concerns. They just don't have the trust of the coaching staff in pass protection. So maybe Miller needed a year to get that down, or someone we're not thinking of.
So we've got 2 Steelers experts on this podcast. So that means, of course, we have to talk about George Pickens and his dynasty value. We will do that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the most fun that I've ever had playing DFS because there's so many different players to choose from and so many different stat projections. It's absolutely phenomenal. Plus, PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return for the second, that player is rebooted. A perfect example of that is Deebo Samuel last week against the Packers. Got hurt in the first drive, never came back. That entry would be rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, we've got a question here from @MulletMaine. He wants to know, what is George Pickens' season outlook in 2024? We were talking before the show. Matt actually just traded for George Pickens. So, Matt, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Total coincidence. But yeah, 2 days ago, I traded Brian Robinson, who we didn't mention in the first segment, and a second that's going to be late. It's a late second for Pickens in a mid-third. And I did that in a heartbeat. I had no hesitation there at all. I was shocked that was even offered. And I think it kind of reflects that people are down on Pickens, and I get that. I understand the Steelers are frustrating. Kate definitely gets that from what I understand. So I could talk an hour on this subject, but in a nutshell, I'm buying Steelers at the moment, especially the passing game, because there's going to be a coordinator change. I mean, to cut to the chase, the coordinator change is massive for me. Now, do they have a quarterback? I don't know the answer to that, but I guarantee life on their quarterbacks will be easier without Matt Canada. And I had to double check this while you were doing a live read because I knew it's insanely low. But over the last 2 regular seasons combined, the Steelers have only thrown 25 touchdown passes. I mean, 25 over 34 games. It's going to go up, and it's going to go to Pickens. It's going to go to Freiermuth. And I can tell you the whole life and history of George Pickens, and I don't know that I trust him. There's certainly volatility there, but I also will tell you I'm a little jaded because I've watched every OTA, every mini camp practice, and every training camp practice live that he's ever been a part of, and he's jaw-dropping, and you want him on your team. I mean, because there's a lot there.
Okay.
There is so much there, and
yeah,
from an every down perspective, the concerns that maybe he's not going to be an every down guy. Obviously, consistency has sort of been, I think, the thing that fantasy managers are kind of lacking from George Pickens. To put it as Mike Tomlin does, to do routine things routinely. That's not George Pickens' game, which I think is what concerns me. Now, finished this year as the wide receiver 33 in fantasy points per game, which is kind of a jaw-dropping number, especially considering the really successful season that he had. Just generally from a statistical standpoint, it seems like it would have translated. He had, over 1,100 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, average 18.1 yards per reception. You would think that should translate to more fantasy production than it did. But, you look at the inconsistency of quarterback, you look at the problems at offensive coordinator. Obviously, all of these things they are not static. These are, evolving aspects of the Pittsburgh Steelers passing game. Do you have any concern, though? Obviously, George Pickens, very young. He is 22 years old, which I think, we talk about maturity concerns for George Pickens, and I think we forget he is literally 22 years old. Despite the fact that he has been in the league 2 years, he is an infant. He is a very, very young kid. And I think he's still learning how to lose. He came from Georgia. This kid's learning how to lose in real time. And we're watching a 22-year-old unfold in that way. Are there any concerns that the Steelers aren't going to have the patience to deal with these immaturity issues and they're going to like wipe hands? I know there's been talk, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens. Is there a chance they move one of these wide receivers in the offseason? And could that impact the fantasy value of George Pickens?
So a lot there to unpack. And you mentioned the inconsistencies. I just did a stat recap for Steelers.com and I just have these handy that Pickens in 4 of his games, he had 125 receiving yards or more. Everyone remembers those games. But he had 9 of them with 50 receiving yards or less. The up and down nature is insane. So I don't think they have any plans to move on. And frankly, in terms of high maintenance receivers, these guys pale in comparison to Antonio Brown and some of the others that have been here, but especially Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant. This is a Tomlin specialty. Give me the super talented receiver around later than he should be. I'll manage him. I'll get him to game day, and we'll figure it out from there. Pickens, I don't think he's a bad guy at all. I think he's extremely competitive. He's used to winning. He's used to being the best. He gets to the campus at Georgia, and everyone's like, you're the next A.J. Green, and he looks like it. And then if you remember, his last year there, he only ran like 30 or 40 routes because he had that knee injury. So he comes to the Steelers after hardly playing his last year at Georgia. They win the national title, of course, no big deal. And leads the league in go routes as a rookie with the Steelers. Matt Canada just runs him down the sideline over and over and over and over and over. He's just doing wind sprints out there, which is very easy to defend if you know it's coming time and time again. This year, his route tree started to develop more. You saw more in-breaking routes, hit him on a slant. He takes it to the house, so it got better. But all I can think about is with a real coordinator with in-breaking routes, they're going to make him the feature receiver, and Tomlin will manage him.
So I've been buying a lot of George Pickens as well this offseason. My question for you, Matt, is if you are a George Pickens manager, what do you want them to do at the quarterback position? Because we saw with Mason Rudolph, he was really productive. Do you want Mason to be back as the guy? Do you want them to go out and sign a Russell Wilson? Like, what's the ideal scenario here?
Well, the ideal scenario would be go get a Kirk Cousins or somebody like that. I don't think
How
that's
realistic
in their cards.
is that?
No, it's not. They still have extreme. No one's going to like hearing this, but they still have extreme faith in Kenny Pickett. So I believe what will happen, doesn't matter what we want, is there will be a new coordinator. Kenny and Trubisky will be gone. They're going to cut him and free that cap space up. They'll probably offer that exact same contract, which is a good backup money, to Rudolph, who they like a lot and did really take steps. That wasn't fluky. If he doesn't take it, they'll give it to somebody like Brissett, somebody that is a good player. I'm a big Jacoby Brissett fan. And they will have a true competition starting in minicamp between Pickett and Rudolph or Brissett or somebody like that. And frankly, I expect Pickett to win it. And if it's a tie, it will go to Pickett. I mean, I can pretty much guarantee you that. Now, I mentioned they've thrown 25 touchdown passes in 2 years. Well, most of them are not even Pickett. He's even worse.
13 of them, right?
It's unbelievable, right? I still have faith that it will get better, but that's the concern. And that's why you can get him cheaper now, of course.
Kate, really quickly, let's just go over his ADP right now on Dynasty League football, being drafted as wide receiver 25. Here are some of the names going ahead of him. You tell me if you're interested in Pickens over any of these guys. Drake London, wide receiver 24, Rashee Rice, wide receiver 23, Nico Collins, wide receiver 22, Tank Dell, wide receiver 21, and Zay Flowers, wide receiver 20.
I'll take him over Zay Flowers.
Is that the only one?
Yes.
Matt, what about you?
It's a good neighborhood, but yeah, I think that's it. I would definitely take him over Flowers. I prefer Rice. I prefer Dell.
The London one is hard. Both guys, same draft class,
Similar.
same age, similar styles, even a little bit.
Similar concerns on offense.
Right.
We don't know what we're going to get there.
That's why they're being drafted against each other.
As Matt said, though, it's a good neighborhood. That feels like
an
appropriate range.
All right, enough about the Steelers. Let's talk about my Dallas Cowboys and let's talk about Tony Pollard and what his outlook looks like for the 2024 season. We will get to him next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Every day, we've got a busy show for you. We'll get you ready for championship weekend. We're going to continue to dive into some ADP on Thursday, looking at some tight ends. So make sure you tune in for that. But our final question here is from @MulletMan again, another really good one. What is Tony Pollard's long-term outlook? Should you hold on to him, or is he a sell right now? Kate, why don't you go first?
I'm selling Tony Pollard faster than I can answer this question. Now, obviously, this season was not ideal for Tony Pollard. I'm not trying to be overreactionary because, Marcus, we've talked a lot about Tony Pollard on this podcast this year. I'm going to be honest. I don't know that he's ever fully returned to form following that lower leg injury. Obviously, explosion is such a big element in his game. And yes, bones break, obviously, and then they heal. But, I do think that there's a chance that maybe he lost some of a little bit of that juice, right? Attached to bones are muscles, and muscles pretty big, important part of that explosive element in the game. But my biggest concern with Tony Pollard doesn't necessarily stem from Tony Pollard. It stems from the entirety of the situation, right? Tony Pollard is coming off what could probably be described as the most disastrous year that he could have anticipated for himself in this circumstance. Looked a little bit better towards the end of the season, but that bad season is now coupled with one of the most competitive free agent markets that we could have imagined. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, Ezekiel Elliott, even DeAndre Swift. Like, this is a very competitive upcoming free agency class for the running back position. And maybe, we see Tony Pollard relegated to more of a complementary role. And maybe that's good for him. Maybe that is, what is better suited for his type of game. But I don't see any of these circumstances, getting him a big time contract that we're going to feel good about investing in, his potential just from a security standpoint.
Matt?
Well, let me ask you, Marcus, this is your team. I mean, they have Dak, Micah, CD, massive contract things looming. Every mock you see has them taking a tackle, it seems like, to replace Tyron Smith. Might he not even be back? So in terms of the to-do list, where's Pollard even fall on that list? Is he going to be an afterthought? Like, I have some thoughts, but I my big concern is he's like Miles Sanders last year, where he flashes about that age, ends up in Carolina, and never to be seen again on a contract too big for what he deserves,
They really like Tony Pollard. They really like how much better he got as a pass protector. That does matter to Mike McCarthy and Dak a lot. But you mentioned a list. Like, he might not even be on the list because of all the other contracts they have to worry about. They're over the cap as is right now. If I had to bet right now, my guess is that he leaves in free agency and they try to grab a veteran back. Maybe it's Derrick Henry. Maybe it's Austin Eckler to try to fill that role. But, Matt, I always just get really nervous about running backs at this age, switching teams, because the new team just isn't going to be as committed to giving them as many touches. This Cowboys team, I mean, I know he was not very successful in the red zone this year, but this has been the highest scoring offense in the league, like, over the last 3 years. So is he going to go to another situation that gives him better and more opportunities? Probably not. He's being drafted as RB 16. I think that's probably about right, but I'm certainly not going out there and buying Tony Pollard right now.
Looking
Yeah,
at
he
the
can.
advanced
Good.
metrics, sorry. Looking at the advanced metrics, like from NFL Next Gen Stats, you look at his average speed, right? Lowest average speed as a running back in his entire career. Percentage of plays where he hit 15 plus miles per hour. Lowest percentage of plays where he has hit that. Lowest average speed when he hits the line of scrimmage. I think all of these they're concerning in and of their own right, especially considering he's an aging running back who just got, plenty of wear this year, even if it didn't amount to much. But I also look at that and I think, okay, so this explosive element to Tony Pollard's game, that's kind of been what's been so crucial. When he starts to lose that element of speed, like we saw this year, it didn't work out. And I think all of these things come to a head. It doesn't sound like any of us are in on trading for Tony Pollard, but is this the time to sell or do you wait until free agency starts? When's the time to sell Tony Pollard?
So a couple thoughts here is he did finish the season rather strong, so there's at least a good taste in the mouth of Pollard owners, or, at the end was better than the beginning. So if people out there might believe, well, he just got over his injuries, he's back. There might be a percentage of people out there that believe that, but he's just about to turn 27, which is the magic age for running backs. And he's not the biggest guy. He's never been a bell cow. And to Marcus's point, which is the anti-Steeler passing game point, he's almost assuredly going to go to a worse situation if he's not back. And if he is back, he's going to share with somebody more prominent than he did this past year. Like his situation this year couldn't have been better. It might have been the best situation that's besides McCaffrey in the league, give or take. So a big thing Ryan taught me in the Dynasty world is pivoting. And it just so happens to work out great with this show is if I own Pollard, if I can turn him into Chase Brown, Zamir White, Spears, and pick up a pick in the process, people might think, wow, one guy's a starter and one guy isn't, but you'll be a lot happier down the stretch.
I agree. I think that's a fantastic way to move Pollard. Break him up into a couple other pieces where if one of them hits, you're golden. And I think Chase Brown, who we talked about at length at the beginning of the show, with X is a perfect way to kind of move off and pivot from Tony Pollard. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. We also post some awesome shorts, so check them out. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Does fantastic work, not only in the fantasy and dynasty world, but also in the actual NFL circles. So go check out Kate's work, Pro Football Focus, Yahoo, Behind the Steel Curtain. Check her out on Twitter at Kate Majuk. And I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.